I grew up in a neighborhood where we owned my folks and other farmers owned the telephone line that connected into Moscow, Idaho. Back in the 1940s, neither companies that built electric power lines like Washington Water Power nor the companies that built telephone lines were interested in serving the Whitman County, Washington farm families. The U.S. government created the Rural Electrical Administration, REA, just like the one in Fairbanks, Alaska, Golden Valley, which provided low interest loans to nonprofit groups, such as farmers who created their own co op organizations to build and operate the electrical lines that serve farms. Farmers built their own telephone lines and paid a fee to connect up to the central telephone exchanges in nearby towns. 11 farm families in our Clinton neighborhood built our telephone line that terminated in Moscow, Idaho. The General Telephone Company Exchange in Moscow was in a building on the south side of Main Street, across a side street from the Moscow Hotel in downtown Moscow. I remember visiting several times when I was young and being fascinated by the tall racks of electrically operated relays that clicked and clacked as calls were routed to their destinations. Our line was a 4K line out of Moscow. I think it connected to the general telephone lines near the border between Idaho and Washington along the Sand Creek Road, which paralleled the South Fork of the Palouse River. It had branches south and southwest to serve local families such as Howard Birch and Bunk Haynes, and came up Stratton Hollow Road, which in 2014 is named Brown Road, to just short of the Reed Place. Dad kept an old telephone and various line repair part tools in our garage. After the crops were planted in the spring, my dad, Bunk Haynes, and John Brown, and other farmers would coordinate their efforts to repair obvious problems, such as a rotted pole that was leaning on the line. The 4K line was about 12 miles of two galvanized 12-gauge springy steel wires hung on glass insulators about 2 feet above one another on wooden poles that stuck about 4 feet into the ground and 15 feet out of the ground. I went along with them from about age 14. Dad and I worked together to repair almost all the problems with Stratton Hollow Road during my high school and college years. A strong windstorm would sometimes swing the bottom wire up over the top wire and leave it stuck there. This shorted out the line, essentially such that no one could use his or her telephone. Dad made an X-rated shaped device about 6 inches on either side of a quarter-inch steel rod and brazed it onto a 1/2 inch galvanized water pipe. He had a collection of 1/2 inch water pipes set aside to make a tool to untangle wind-tangled telephone lines. Sometimes a pole rotted off next to the ground and we had to reset the pole. I don't ever remember putting a new pole. We would disconnect wires from the old pole, dig a new post hole and pick it up and set it in the hole, tamp dirt around the base of the pole and lean a ladder against it and reconnect the wires. When a wire blew loose from an insulator on a pole, we were more careful about climbing the pole itself, as they were all 30 years or more old, and sometimes part in the ground had rotted through. More than once, a pole broke while Dad or I was climbing a ladder leaning against it. We always tried to lean our ladder against the pole such that if it did go down, it would land in recently tilled dirt. We got dirty, but it was a soft landing. The telephone wires attached to the top of the pole slowed the descent, if not freshly tilled before, so we chose to place the ladder and climb such that we felt was an easy fall. We had a climbing belt and spiked metal straps we could strap on each booted foot, but the poles were so old we rarely trusted the spikes to go deep enough so the nut would strip out, and we rarely used them. Our number was 4K3. That meant we were the 4K line out of Moscow, and when we heard 3 short rings, that someone was trying to call us. My Aunt Eveline down the road from us was 4K23. To reach her, you cranked the handle on the magneto in our wall-mounted telephone to create 2 long rings and 3 short rings. We initiated calls by lifting the receiver to see whether or not anybody else was using the line. You had to wait a few seconds to be sure, because sometimes there was a little conversation when one farm wife went to get a recipe or something like that. Once you determined no one else was using it, you hung the receiver back and cranked 1 long ring to get the operator Moscow, or the combination of long and short rings necessary to get another family on our line to answer. As you were talking on the telephone, you could hear other people click on to see it within use. You could hear them click off as well. You were not supposed to listen in, but more than once there seemed to be a long time between the click on and off. When thunder and lightning occurred, we were cautioned to stay away from our telephones, lest lightning strike the line and bring electricity into our homes. I remember hearing a story about someone in our neighborhood being killed by ball lightning that floated across the room, sizzling, and killed a man lying with his head in the lap of his wife. Many rural telephone lines in America were converted to dial phones in the late 1950s, but not our 4K3 line. When I was in Thule, Greenland, from July 62 to 63, I had to argue with long distance operators again and again to place a call home telling them 4K3 existed. Years later, they buried the telephone lines in the Clinton area and installed dial telephones before my mother died in 1992.